Minister, first of all, you're absolutely right to say that the failure to pass these estimates today would create a real challenge for people who depend on all of the payments. So we certainly will be supporting the revised estimates, and we do want a constructive debate. So I will give way to the Minister during my 10 minutes if she wants to interject at any time. But I think the Minister will also accept that pointing out what we see as problems or failures or concerns is also being constructive, and it's part of our job. And the first and obvious point to make, which was made by the previous speaker, is the fundamental flaw in the estimates that are being presented to us is that it operates on a no policy change basis, when everybody knows that there will be a policy change, because it's operating on the basis that all of the COVID emergency payments, and the two main ones in terms of the PUP payment and the wage subsidy scheme, will come to an end in sometime in early June, and then people will transfer on to social welfare payments. We had mixed messages yesterday from the floor of the Dáil, from the Taoiseach and other ministers, and I've no reason to doubt the Taoiseach at all in relation to what he said. But on the one hand, he said that there's no reason for people to fear that the current emergency payments will continue as they are. But then he went on to say later, or earlier, whenever it was, that no decision has been made yet. The Cabinet hasn't made a decision, and in fact it might be a decision for a future government or a new government, so it can't be both. So I'm assuming what happened here is that what the Taoiseach is actually saying is that we foresee in the short term that we will extend these payments, but that a decision will be made in the medium to longer term, maybe when a new government is formed or maybe not, as to what rates those payments will be and how long those payments will remain in place. The difficulty with all of that, Minister, is that it does sow confusion. And there are people out there who depend on these payments, and the vast majority of them want to go back to work. Let there be no doubt about that, despite all of the unnecessary rhetoric that I think was associated with some of this, and the previous speaker spoke about it in terms of percentages of people who might be slightly better off or much better off. The vast majority of these people are people who are working and want to go back to work. That's the first objective for all of these people. But they also have bills to pay. So as we sit here today and as we debate these estimates, there is no certainty for any of these workers. There is a commitment from the floor of the Dáil, from the Taoiseach, that they will continue, but we don't know for how long and by how much. These are people with mortgages, rents to pay, food to put on the table. They have to plan for the future. These payments are up in 2 weeks' time. So it would be helpful if the government was able to make a firm decision on this, and to be able to give those workers the certainty that they need. And I'm sure the Minister will accept that these are people who are worried and are concerned, and it isn't the opposition or others trying to add to that fear or that anxiety. We are all being lobbied, and we are all being asked questions from people who are on those payments. What's going to happen in 2 weeks' time? And we can't give clear, firm answers, because what the Taoiseach said yesterday is that no decision has been made yet. On the one hand, that the Cabinet will make the decision, but the payments will continue, and they're confused. And I think it would be helpful if the Minister was to clarify that at some point. It's also important to point out that the decisions we make economically and fiscally here are hugely important. And all of the international evidence, and we see it today from more reports again coming out from think tanks and others, is that what we need is investment, what we need is stimulus, and what we need is to continue with all of the income supports which are there, because if we don't, then small to medium-sized businesses are in real trouble. If we start, which we did in the past, take the axe to social welfare, take the axe to people on low pay, cut their incomes, they will not have any discretionary spend. They don't have very much anyway. I can tell you, if any at all, on €350. You start cutting their payments and they're in real trouble, and we end up then creating more problems for ourselves, as we did in the past, because they won't be able to pay their mortgages, and that will create problems for the banks. They won't be able to pay their utility bills, that will create problems for those companies. They won't be able to pay their rents, and that creates problems for those tenants. So all of this is intertwined and intertangled, and we need to make sure that we make the right political choices here in relation to investment and stimulus. So our first priority has to be to get those people back to work, and we do that by making the right choices. But we also have to accept, and I'm sure the Minister will accept, that there are some sectors of the economy which will take longer to recover. So we know what they are. It's hospitality, it's tourism, it's other sectors. They are going to take, unfortunately, longer, and we need sector recovery packages for those sectors. But you see, the people who work in those sectors, it's still going to be an emergency for them for some time to come. So when we introduce emergency payments, we can't then say that at some point in the future we might revise those schemes, we might cut back, but the emergency still exists, they still have bills to pay. So we're making a reasonable assertion to government. For as long as the emergency continues for those workers, the emergency payments should continue. It's very simple. I do want to come to this notion that there are anomalies, and the government wants to solely focus on the anomalies in terms of this perception that there are people who are gaming the system and people who are much better off and they don't want to go back to work. I think that's nonsense. The vast majority do. But even in the table that's presented to us on page 13 in the revised estimates, first of all, the figures are based on returns data for 2018. We did have discussions with officials yesterday where they said the 2019 data will be available shortly. The income bands that it breaks it down are far too big, far too broad, but it doesn't take into account a number of very obvious points. That for some of these people, they're part-time workers, and they're students who would have been working part-time, who would have been anticipating that they would be working full-time during the summer months. That's not taken into account from my perspective. It doesn't take into account seasonal workers. That's the second issue that should be taken into account. But the main issue it doesn't take into account, and I think what government should be focused on, and we all should be focused on, because I had numerous debates with this minister and government ministers in the past on these issues, the fact that we have people working full-time, earning less than €350 is the problem. All the more reason why we need to deal with low pay. All the more reason why we need to deal with precarious work. All the more reason why we need a living wage, which is, again, glaringly obvious from all of this. I also want to put on the record to the Minister as well, and I know it's not directly relevant to these revised estimates, but the Stop 67 campaign for people who are concerned about the pension age needs clarity as well, because there was a lot of promises made on this, and we're hearing yesterday now that some of those promises might be rolled back on. I think that would be absolutely unacceptable, and I want to make it very, very clear that we in Sinn Féin will not be resiling from our commitments that workers should be able to retire at the age of 65, have the choice to do so, and we also end mandatory retirement. I would like at this point, and I'll give the Minister just a couple of minutes to respond to some of the points that I've made. To be fair, she hasn't interjected, but I would want to give her a few minutes to respond. I do think as well, Minister, that we're going to have to look at the issue of debt and household debt. Already I know there are many families who have put off paying their mortgages, put off paying their electricity bills, put off paying telecommunication bills and rent, even with the incomes that they have. I think we will need to look at a debt resolution process, possibly MABS or some other organisation overseeing that, to adjudicate on all of this as we emerge out of the crisis. We have to make sure that families, we need to do the same for business, but we're talking here about social protection. We're going to have to make sure that we do the same for families. So I know there's an awful lot in that, Minister. There's about a minute and a half of my contribution left, and I'm more than happy to give the Minister that minute and a half to respond. Thank you.
Really do today, and it's not ideal. I wish that we had more weeks in the payment of the 4/5 rule so that we could bring probably what will be next week or early the following week's decision by government. But those decisions are being worked on and they are imminent. They will be very, very shortly. But just to say, I can absolutely confirm that the payments will extend beyond the June date. As we gradually move through the phases, we introduced the PUP payment. And it wasn't done to get plaudits or to get thanks. It was done at such breakneck speed to get money into people's pockets, which I think we did do. And it isn't perfect, and we all know that, right? But we can't take away something from people when we still haven't given them the opportunity to return to work. And so I think that's the basis of the decisions that will be made, and I hope that gives you some comfort. And I do apologise that I can't tell you what I'm proposing, but it will be within the next number of days, and I hope everybody can understand. Can I just disassociate myself and anybody else who has wrongly intimated that there are people gaming the system? Yes, there is fraud in the system, the same way as there's fraud in every other system of every other country. And I think you can see for the papers that with the police, we're catching some of those people, but they're small numbers. There is nobody gaming the system. There's nobody who will be having their payment taken off them if they can't go back to work because of the variety of reasons that might stop them, which is childcare or maybe underlying health care. You know, all of those things were enshrined in the payment when it was set up, and they're not going to be suddenly just whipped away because we reach a phase next week where it's going to be rolled over. people have been enormously helpful in the government's fight and the country's fight of this virus, and I think the government has to recognise that and to pay tribute to them for the last couple of months. But I do also think that we have to recognise that this was established as an income support, and there are some people getting more from it than they would have been earning in the income, and I totally agree with you. I think for me all that does is highlight some of the reasons that we had difficulty with part-time workers.